Okay, so in preparing for our discussion this morning, I really had a difficult time because we spent much of our week kind of laying the foundation for what we're going to be studying for the next 2 weeks. So I don't want to get ahead of your joy of discovery. I don't want to say too much, but I also want to cover what we have. So it's been it's kind of been interesting getting ready for it. So as we discuss this morning, I think it's going to be good to provide parameters for what we're going to talk about for our discussion. And then you can still ask questions and you can still wonder things, right? But don't be surprised if the answer is,
it's coming
it's
later.
coming, or it's, it's ahead of us. I just don't want to, I don't even know what we're going to study yet, but I don't want to get ahead of some of the things. So that's why I think we need to kind of have those parameters. And so what I thought we'd do this morning is we're going to review first, obviously, and then we're going to lay the parameters for our discussion. But I do want to say this before we jump in, that it is getting good. Is it not? Yeah. It's getting good. And there are things for me from all over Scripture and all of the time that I've studied in the Word that are just like coming all together and just right here, and I'm getting so excited to see God's redemption plan. I mean, it's exciting. I'm like, I can't wait to talk about it. So I'm trying to keep a rein on myself this morning, and that's why I'm setting these parameters for our discussion. So let's do first things first. Let's do a good review. What book are we studying?
Hebrews.
Hebrews, all right.
We've missed you, by the way.
I know.
I heard that on the video. I got so tickled. You guys all said, "Where's Carolyn?" Made me feel so wanted.
Yes, you are a necessary part of our study.
Thank you.
For sure.
Okay, now let's talk about the author of Hebrews. What do we know about the author of Hebrews?
We don't know exactly who it is, but we know he was a contemporary of Timothy, because he mentions Timothy, and that he's a second-hand hearer. He was not one of the original.
Right, so we know a little bit about his testimony, right?
Yeah.
He's a second-hand hearer, but he's also a believer, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is not
Right.
coming from an attitude of skepticism at all,
Right.
right? He has laid aside all that he knew formerly. Now, we would probably suspect also from studying the book that he's Jewish, that he has a Jewish
Right.
background, right? I mean, he just knows too much about this stuff. I mean, we don't know about these things. And now, in turn, let's talk about the recipients. Who are the recipients, or what do we know about them?
They are also Jewish believers.
Right, so they are believers. We
Yes.
have come to that conclusion based on our study, not based on commentaries and that sort of thing, based on just reading the book. And we believe that they are likely of mostly Jewish, that heritage, because of the way that things are just mentioned and kind of, now you understand them. I'm
It's
mentioning this.
assumed
It's
that they
assumed.
understand this. They know
Yes.
that.
Now, what are they facing? They're facing something
Persecution.
internally, and they're facing something externally. Okay, externally is persecution, right? So they've got situations of imprisonment, the taking of property, having to deal with the fact that they are separate in this world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's going on the inside? What's the danger that they face on the inside?
Drifting away.
Right. So what would it be most likely that they would be drifting away toward?
They'd be drifting away from their newfound faith and back toward the law,
Right.
the Jewish.
Right, it's go back to what you know, right?
Right.
Go back to what's safe, that kind of thing, because of the persecution, because of Judaizers, because of all sorts of things, right? And so they have that danger, and he's very concerned about them, and so he writes this brief word of exhortation. So we know from reading and studying the book of Hebrews that he is writing a letter of exhortation. So that's the purpose of the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and And there is encouragement in it, but there's also the next kind of more bold way of encouraging is to then exhort, and that would be with instruction, right? It's also coming alongside, right? We've talked about that he talks about we need to do this instead of you need to do this. Right. It's we together. So there's that encouragement too. Okay, what's the theme of the book?
Consider Jesus, our great high priest.
Consider Jesus, our great high priest. That consider Jesus is one of our exhortations from the book. So that keeps it in our minds that it's a book of exhortation. But the focus of the book is Jesus and specifically in his role as our high priest. So he's laying out this picture of Jesus, and what a picture we've gotten so far. Have we been just loving it and enjoying it so much? It's been so good. Okay, so I already said this a little bit, but I'm going to just ask it again for review. What does the author want the recipients, to lay aside? What kind of thing? Leave, not go back to. What kind of things does he want them to go away from?
The old law?
Yeah, the law, right? So he wants them to kind of lay that aside.
Yeah.
Their old ways, their old practices, the law, lay that aside, right?
Yeah.
And he wants them to, what does he want them to do instead?
Press on to maturity.
Press on to maturity. Pay much closer attention to what you've heard, right? That he wants them to stand firm, to hold fast to the things that they have. It's okay. Okay. So he wants them to hold fast, right? Until when? For just a couple of more days?
To the end.
Till the end.
Yeah.
Hold fast what you have until the end, right? So be faithful. And so remember that this book is a very forward-looking book, right? This is eyes on Jesus, Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who will one day bring us and bring our faith into completion when we are with him. So it's all forward focused. But the way that we know that we are his is by standing firm through all of what life brings us. All that God puts in our path, we walk through that and we are faithful to him with our eyes on him. Okay, so how does he make the argument for Jesus? How has he been making the argument of you need to be looking at Jesus? Why should we look at him?
Because he's so much better than all of these things.
Right, and so we talked about it last week too, that in our review and kind of throughout it's just throughout the book, but each chapter he's presenting Jesus as a better option than something else. So remember, he's better than angels, he's better than the prophets, he's better than Moses, he's worthy of more glory than Moses, he's better than the Aaronic high priesthood. I mean, it's just on and on and on. So he's better, he's better, he's better, he's better, right? And then we started looking at the better of, we rock along in Hebrews, right? And we were building and building this argument of Jesus, the argument for his sufficiency and for his efficacy of Jesus as our great high priest. And now we've come all the way to chapter 9. And we started to see his ministry, and his ministry is in a role as high priest, right? But he's a high priest of a different sort, right? What sort of high priest is Jesus?
Melchizedek.
Or kind? Or
Order of
Order of
Melchizedek.
Right, so he is not, according to the law and according to the earthly situation that has been established, he's not able to be a high priest. He's not qualified, right? Because he's not of the what?
Line of Aaron.
The line of Aaron. He's not even a Levite, right? But he is the line of Judah, and he is promised, God makes an oath that he is a high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And so we talked about that Melchizedekian high priest, kind of almost like a stair step, that here's Aaron and here's the Melchizedek, because remember that whole, he gave tithes to, that whole thing. Okay, so there's all of that.
And priest.
Yeah, so that's just been part of this process of revealing him as not only our great high priest, but a better high priest, right? And we also discovered last week that he serves in a better place, right? Because the place is not the shadow, it's the actuality, right? Remember we talked about the tabernacle on earth and even the Holy of Holies being a picture of what is in heaven, and that it is the shadow of what is the substance that is in heaven. So that's where Jesus serves. So that's better too, right? Do we agree that it's better? Yes, we agreed that it was better and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, what the problem is for us as modern day Christians is that we don't get all the ins and outs of this. So every time that we kind of come up to this high priesthood, we have to go back to the old one and kind of figure out what's he talking about, because he mentions it like they know what he's talking about, and they do, but we don't. So we got to go back to the Old Testament this week. So we went and we looked back at the Jewish sacrificial system. And we looked this week at Leviticus for the most part, but we also looked at Exodus. And we examined specifically the Day of Atonement in detail, in very, very serious detail. But still for me, it's hard to grasp. I still kind of, I drew it. I did everything. I did everything they asked me to, and yet it was still kind of, okay, I have a few more questions about like what happens and that kind of thing. And so I'm looking forward to, because they didn't tell us to go look at commentaries. So I'm looking forward to when we can look at commentaries and get more understanding. And I was thinking about Troy, and I'm like, Troy could probably just come in here and tell us everything that's going to happen on the Day of Atonement. He just would be able to lay it out in a way, because he's really good at that stuff. So, but maybe we'll have that privilege. Maybe we'll know it ourselves. But we are studying it. We're in the process. So today, in our discussion, we're going to set our parameters, okay? We're going to talk about the Day of Atonement only. We're not going to talk about all the craziness, because there's a lot of craziness, and I'm too excited about it. So, but as always, we're going to discuss the 5 W's and an H, or we're going to talk about what is observable from what we have studied, right? That what, who, what, when, where, why, and how. What is the obvious in this? And so we're just going to do observation. Now first, I thought what we would do is we will find out what Hebrews 9 and 10 have to say about this day. As a hint to you, it is not much. It's not even called the Day of Atonement in Hebrews 9 and 10, but we do know that that's what he's talking about. So let's pull out our Hebrews 9 and 10. Now, this is another little hint. I marked it and was able to find it by the phrase year by year. Now you'll also find in there the phrase, I think it's over and over, let's see, time after time, daily. You'll find there's day to day, there's time after time, but where he's talking about the Day of Atonement, he says year after year.
Oh.
Okay, and why would that be a year after year situation? Because it was once a year, one day a year. So it's this year we did this, the next year we did this, and so it'd be year by year. So with that as kind of a guide for locating where he's talking about the Day of Atonement in chapters 9 and 10, the first time that he mentions it is in verse 7. Once a year. So there's that marking of a year, right? And so what do we find out about this Day of Atonement in verse 7?
Blood.
The high priest is the one who enters, and he takes blood to offer not only for the sins of the people, but for himself.
Okay, the high priest enters. Tell me again, I'm sorry, I'm listening to you, but I'm also trying to write.
With blood.
He enters with blood.
And that's offered for himself and for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. I find that
Uh-huh.
interesting.
Okay, so the high priest enters when? Did we
Once
answer
a
the
year.
when?
Once a year.
Okay,
Once a
so
year.
it's once a year. Okay, that answers the when question.
On the
Who
10th.
is high priest, right?
Yes,
What does he do? He enters.
enters.
What does he have with him? Or how
Blood.
does he enter? With blood. And who's that for?
Himself
For
and the
himself
people.
and for the people. Is there anything else that's in there in the,
The Y is before their sins.
okay, for their
Committed.
sins, okay. Okay, that's a Y. Okay, that's from Hebrews 9, verse 7.
Mhm.
Now, the next place, oh wait, let me make sure I'm giving you the right list here. Continuing down in that same thought, in verse 9, he says something about those gifts and sacrifices that are offered.
You cannot make the worshiper perfect in conscience.
Okay, so that's a really key thing to
Yeah.
remember. So from 9, verse 9, we know that this process that he goes through cannot make anyone perfect
In conscience.
in conscience.
I'm glad they had us look up the word conscience.
Yes. Okay, so that kind of continues that thought. The next time that we see it is in 9:25.
It's year by year.
Okay, so it's once a year, and it is year by year. Okay?
Not with his own blood.
Okay, so the blood that he enters, the blood that he enters with is not his own.
Right.
Okay?
Okay, so that's a how question on that one, is it?
Yeah, kind of like
How?
like how does he enter? Because he can't enter without that, right? Now, where does it say he enters in verse 25?
The holy place.
Okay, so that gives us that little bit more detail, right? He enters the holy place.
That means Holy of Holies, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And remember we talked, oh, well, you haven't seen the video from last week because I haven't even put it up. But we talked about that last week, that there are places where he refers to, the author of Hebrews refers to the holy place as just the tabernacle or the entire tabernacle. And then there's other places where he refers to just the Holy of Holies as the holy place. So it does get a little bit confusing, so you have to watch that context to know exactly what he's talking about. But because we know that this is the one time a year situation that he's talking about,
We know
we
it's
know
the
that
Holy
he's
of
referring to the Holy of Holies inside and behind the veil.
Mhm.
I don't know why my pens just, like they, I don't know. Anyway, okay, that doesn't really matter. Okay, the next time that we see it is, where my list go? There we go. Is in 10:1.
It says offer continually, but then it says year by year.
Yeah, so it's a continual practice, right? Every year it's happening, right? Or it's supposed to, right? So it's continually. This is, do you remember, and as we looked back at it, that he calls it a perpetual statute?
Yes.
Right? So that would
Permanent.
point to that back in the Old Testament, that this was a perpetual statute. He doesn't say, oh, take a year off. You don't need that anymore, right? It's every year, without fail, this is supposed to happen, right?
That's kind of what's been puzzling me. If it happens year by year, what do the Jewish believers right now
Yeah.
think and do that this isn't being done?
Right, it's a different, I mean, again, I don't know as much about the modern day Jewish culture, I don't know much about the old Jewish culture. But yeah, I mean, they're doing it a completely different way. That sacrificial system has been laid aside. And so I don't know how I don't know if maybe they spiritualize it to a certain extent.
Aren't they fearful for not,
I would be,
you know,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
right. But again, I think they may have spiritualized
Yes.
it. They've moved it into,
Yes.
okay, well, we don't have to do it physically
Yes.
anymore,
Yes.
but we're going to, not pretend, I don't know, pretend's not the right word,
Yeah,
but you know,
yeah.
like, it's that this is happening in another realm kind of thing, right? Which is interesting because I did just the tiniest bit of research this week online, and let me just tell you, do not go online to research things about
Yeah.
the Bible. The stuff that you get where they say that everything is spiritualized, it's like, no, there's got to be some literal in here,
Yeah,
right? Because I
yeah.
believe that
Yeah.
book right there is literal,
Literal.
right? So if I start taking and picking and choosing what I think is spiritual and what I think is literal, we're in a whole heap of trouble. And so I think that's kind of where they've gotten themselves into trouble, because now,
because you read the Old Testament, I mean, you're in fear of like
Yeah.
not.
right, it's a holy God and it's a holy perpetual statute. So yeah, I mean,
You're left with just that. I mean.
but then you also have the fact that when Jesus did this, when it was finished, that
It stopped.
veil was
Yeah.
rent in two.
Yeah.
And it is a message from heaven saying, you no longer have to do this, right?
Right.
So they have it, but they haven't put their faith in that yet. So again, I think it must be, they've moved it to a different place, right?
Uh-huh.
They moved it to a spiritual place as opposed to a physical place. And then of course, and I love that, I feel like the author of Hebrews knew what was coming.
Yeah.
That this was getting ready to pass away.
Yes.
This whole system was getting ready to go away, and he
Yeah.
says that. And then we have the destruction of the temple,
Yes.
which would be another sign from God up in heaven saying, you no longer have to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
And yet, we do have people that still have that stiff neck and that they don't want to place their faith in who God has said, this is my son in whom I am well pleased, right? So, yeah, I think it's just that they're doing it on a different plane, so to speak. Okay, so this is a continual, perpetual, and the Old Testament would tell us a perpetual statute, so this is an every year thing that is supposed to be taking place, this Day of Atonement. Yes, they do still have a Day of Atonement, but it's just different.
Done different.
Yeah, it's just done different. Okay, and then what else does it say in verse 1 there about of chapter 10?
Well, it repeats again that it can never make perfect those who draw near.
Okay, so this is just repeated here. So it's in 9:9, but it's also in 10:1. This same, I've got to get a different pen. This is ridiculous. I can't read anything. Look at this purple. Ooh. Can you read that? Is that
Yes.
better?
Oh,
Oh, nice and bold.
Good. Go, girl.
All right, so we have Hebrews 10, verse 1 tells us that it's continually year by year, and that still does not make perfect those who draw near. Okay, what about in 10:3?
Reminder of sins.
Oh, okay, so that's a new thing, right? It's for their sins, but it is a reminder of sins. And it's a reminder, not just of sins, but that you're not perfect, right? And you still won't be perfect. After the day dawns tomorrow, you're still in your sins, right? Because it didn't wash away that conscience, right? It didn't purify their conscience. It didn't purify their bodies. It was a covering for their sin, right? Okay. So So that is, I think, the sum total of what he has to say about this Day of Atonement without even actually mentioning it. Remember, it's almost like shorthand. I mean, they just know what he's talking about, right? So what we had to do as modern ignorant people is we had to go find out some wisdom. We had to go to Leviticus. We had to look at Exodus and Leviticus and that kind of thing. And we had to get some details about this Day of Atonement. And so we looked at some of the furniture of the tabernacle this week. We talked about some of the details of what goes on the furniture, and just detail upon detail upon detail, right? And then we looked at the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16. So let's talk about what we learned. We're gonna walk through the Day of Atonement, okay? So what happens first?
He has to wash
Okay.
his
So,
body and put on his garments.
Okay, and where does he do that?
In the first bronze.
Where does he wash?
Oh, in the circle.
Right here in the circle.
The circle, everybody knows it's the circle.
According to OSI, it's
Totally fine, totally fine. You know,
There you go.
so it wasn't good enough for him to go down to the river and wash, right? This is not an in the river situation. This is not a bathtub situation. This is done. It's a ceremonial washing that is done at the laver, right? Or
Yes.
the laver, or whatever you call it.
Laver.
So it's here. It's at the laver.
I thought it was a private bath.
Well, and keep in mind that this is not where this is where they meet him, right? This is where the priest meets him. Who comes in here?
Where the priest meets
This is
who?
where the priests meet the people, right? Right here at the door.
Okay.
Right?
Priest entering.
Who comes in here?
The priest.
The priests. The priesthood, right?
Right.
Who comes in here?
The whole,
High
the high
priest.
priest.
Yeah, the one high priest once a year, in here, sorry, I was pointing the wrong direction.
Okay.
So he comes all the way into here during that once a year thing, okay? But this is for the priesthood. So the priesthood, he's got some privacy is what I'm trying to say, right? He can do this ceremonial washing, and he does it here. And then, what does he do? He puts on what?
The linen undergarments and then the outer garment.
Right, so he gets fully dressed in the full accoutrement of the high priest.
Right.
Right, do you remember he has a breast piece over him, and we talked about that a little bit ago? Do you have pictures? Okay. Would you like to show it?
Sure.
Okay, can you turn it around, or does it?
I have to get back to it, so go ahead.
Oh, okay, so he's got that on, and he's got this crown that is on his head, and it's got
Turban.
holy to the Lord, right here, and he's got his undergarment. I mean, he's got a big robe, and there's the
on his shoulders.
yeah, there's all these details, right? So he gets all of this on, right? This is not the typical wear of the daily priest, right? This is a special holy garment.
Is this done every day, or that's just on that one day he does that?
I think that this is just the
This
one
is
day.
just the one day,
Yeah.
Okay.
and this, the plain robe is every day.
Yes, right. So there's a special, this is a special day, this is a special outfit. This is like Easter Sunday. You get your Sunday best on and you go, right? Except for this is
Put
like.
on your fancy day.
Yeah, this is even more serious. Yeah, so this is the garb of the high priest on the Day of Atonement. So he's got this on, okay? He is
And there's
washed.
bells around the hem.
Yes,
so
there's
that-
bells on the hem, and why is that?
So they can
Dies.
tell whether he's still moving in there or if he's been struck dead.
They also have a rope or something
Yes.
tied to his ankle.
Yes.
So they
Yes.
can grab
So they
him
can
out.
pull him out.
There's no movement after a while.
I know.
If the bells quit ringing, they pull on that rope.
And that lets
That's
us
right.
know that God was serious.
Yes.
When he talked
Oh,
about,
very
you
serious.
have to be washed, you have to be prepared, you have to follow this specific guideline, because I am holy. If you come in here and you're not holy, what happens?
You are there.
Yeah, you fall down dead, right? So, okay, so we talked about what happens first, he washes, and who is it that's doing this? The high priest. And how do you become the high priest?
You have to be
You
born
have
into.
You have to be born into one family, right? Just
Aaron.
one. You have to be in the line of Aaron, right? Okay. Now, what does Aaron? I'm gonna say it like it's Aaron. Like this is
Okay.
the first day of atonement. Okay. So what does Aaron do after he is washed and dressed?
He takes 2 male goats from the congregation and a bull.
And a ram.
Okay. See, this is where
That's
I
where
got
I
Yes,
started
yes.
getting
it started getting dicey, didn't
Yes,
it?
yes.
And that's why I'm like, okay, someday we'll be able to go look at a commentary. I want to read a book that
But I
like does
think it's
it moment by
differentiating
moment.
between the two. One
Yes.
is a sin offering, which is the scapegoat, and
Right.
the ram is for the burnt offering, the
Okay.
sin offering. I think
Okay,
it's
But
just-
there's a bull
The
for a
bull
sin
in
offering
verse
for
Yes.
Aaron and his
And
family.
in verse
I
11.
think there's lots of sacrificing going on.
There's
That's what I.
there's some sacrifice.
Because there's a difference between a ram
Yes.
and a goat.
And a
Oh,
bull.
yes.
A
And a bull.
ram is a boy sheep.
A
Right,
ram is
so
a
they're-
goat, yeah, a male goat.
A sheep.
I think it's a sheep.
a sheep.
Isn't it
It's
a
a male
male
sheep.
A ram is a sheep,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so
Well, now we'd have to look up the word
Look
for
up the
the
words.
context
Yeah, that's
here,
true, that's
but-
true.
I told you we're gonna get
Yeah.
into it, okay? Because I still got confused. So I
Have you gone ahead, Laura? Is it a goat? Is it a male goat?
Did you cheat, Lauren?
maybe. Did you cheat with your own brain and your own knowledge that you already have? You're supposed to not have any of that.
Fair.
Well, here's what I'm thinking, okay? Then this is how I drew it out, okay? And it is interesting because in Leviticus 16, I feel like he kind of one step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
like he says this happens, and then he
Uh-huh.
backs up and he says, "Oh, but this happened,"
Right.
and then he kind of moves forward, and then he
Yes.
goes, "Oh, but I forgot to tell you that you need to do this too." And it seems like it's just
Yeah.
like, okay, how much is going
Yeah.
on here, right? Okay, so I took it one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, that's
too.
the way I had to do it because otherwise I just wouldn't get it. So we have. I feel really awful drawing these pictures. We have, I don't even know how to draw this anymore. This is a bull.
He's gotta have a tail.
This was his tail. Okay, this will be his tail.
I'll
Okay.
tell you what
Another-
would tell us it's a bull.
Well, but we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that, and we're not gonna do that. Okay. So here's a bull.
Okay,
We'll
put a
we'll
bee on
call
the
him a
bull.
bull.
okay.
Okay, and then I was thinking that a ram meant a male sheep,
Right.
Yes.
okay? Now,
Okay.
I can be wrong, but this is, again, we're gonna study it further and we will be instructed if we are wrong,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
We will be willing to lay it aside and go, okay, well, this is what you're
Okay.
talking about. Okay, but this is the way I drew it and this is the way I have it in my mind.
Okay.
So then we have a sheep, and he's a ram. And he says, "Bah." That's this is the ram.
Okay, got it.
Okay, we've got a ram, we've got a bull. Now,
2 male goats.
2 male goats.
hold on, I'm not ready. Like I said, I need to
Right.
take it one at a
I
time.
have
Okay.
So let's
So-
attach verses.
okay,
So that's
yeah.
verse 3.
Okay, this is verse 3 of Leviticus 16,
Correct.
if you need to have that.
And then it repeats again, doesn't it?
Yes, it's mentioned a few times, okay? So we have this bull and this ram. Now, what are the bull and the ram for?
The bull is a sin
Sin
offering
offering, and the ram is a burnt
Burnt
offering.
off.
for Aaron and his household.
Well, in 3, we're only told the bull is a sin offering and the ram is a burnt offering.
Right, okay, so he offers, who is this sin offering for?
It's
Aaron
for-
himself and his family.
For Aaron and his family.
Right.
And
that's
this is
six.
for who?
Same thing.
For the sins of the people, right? Is
Okay,
that,
the bowl for the sin offering, which is for himself.
okay,
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then when we go
And
to
two-
11, the bowl is a sin offering for himself and the atonement and his household.
and his household, so
You're right,
we
so
don't.
that is true, that the bowl is just for him and his household.
That's what I
Okay.
got, okay? This is for Aaron.
But
and
it
his
also
house.
goes on to say that the blood of the bull is to make atonement for the holy place, and tent of meeting, and for the altar.
Yes, yes.
places.
So now, then we, that part almost was like an afterthought for me, or like added on later as we got further and further. So now we have it being for Aaron, for his household, for the holy place, and the stuff inside, right? I
Right,
don't mean to like call it stuff, but
Mhm.
the
yes.
furniture, okay? So here we have this offered. Let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Now, what happens to this bull?
Slaughtered.
Slaughtered, yeah.
He's
Blood
killed.
is sprinkled.
And where would that happen?
On the altar,
Right here.
right there.
Okay, so he has taken a bull at this point. Again, this is not, I'm not trying to separate it all out because I think we're gonna find that it ends up happening kind of all at the similar time, right? You can't do it all at once, but we take this bull and lay him on the altar, cut his throat, right? And then what does he take?
The blood.
The blood. So he takes, and I'm just gonna represent that with like a little bowl, okay?
I have a picture of the altar too.
And feel free to share any of your pictures. Okay, so we have this blood. What happens to this blood?
It gets sprinkled. Go ahead.
On and in front of the mercy seat,
And this is
and
the
on
mercy-
the altar.
Okay, so we have, how many times does it say?
7 times.
So 7 times in front of, 7 times in front of the altar, and it's also sprinkled on the altar.
On the
as well.
mercy seat.
Right, on the mercy seat. Okay, so we have the blood there. Okay, is it sprinkled anywhere else?
The altar.
On the altar, of course, it's, spilled on the altar, but we have the blood here. Anywhere else?
Does he put that on the horns of the incense?
Yes, now that was not mentioned in Leviticus 16. So that's the part where I was like, okay, so this is another thing. That was mentioned in our cross-reference in Exodus chapter 30.
Ah,
Okay, where we looked at the altar of incense, it told us that atonement was made on the horns once a year with blood of the sin offering for atonement.
Which
On
was
that
the
altar
bull.
of
Actually, if
incense.
you look at Leviticus 18,
16?
16, 18.
Oh, okay.
Then he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it,
Right,
and shall take some of the blood of the bull, of the blood of the goat, and blah, 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 the horns of the altar. The it there isn't the altar,
this right here, yeah, so we
So
put
he-
blood there. I put blood
so
there.
he does make
Right,
atonement
puts
for
it
the
there.
altar.
But then he
Yeah.
also is putting it on the,
You left it out of your picture.
I did, because some people think it's
Oh,
in
on
one
the other
place.
side, yeah.
And
Oh,
some people
whether it's
think it's
inside
in
or
another. So
outside
I
or
wanted
what?
to, I didn't want to like presume anybody, but we do have this incense, right? And it is told in Exodus 30 that this altar of incense is cleansed on the Day of Atonement. Even though our Leviticus 16 doesn't clearly state that it is the altar of incense that it's talking about.
The replica that I saw in Israel has it right outside the curtain of the Holy of Holies.
Okay,
So it would,
Like here.
right,
like here.
so the incense would be, you could smell it in both
Right.
places, I'm sure.
Right.
And I know I'm not drawing it to proportion.
But then I thought it was interesting in 16:12, when he says he took a fire pan full of coals, or censer,
Yeah.
would be, and 2 handfuls of incense on it and brought it inside the veil.
Yes.
So I was
Uh-huh.
wondering if maybe that's where they got the inside.
Yes.
And on the
Yeah.
outside.
I
of
thought the
veil.
same thing.
Yes, and that's what's interesting too, and that is what they were kind of talking about a little bit in the translation. There's maybe that was just in the teacher notes, but he talked about it in the video too last week of that it's about that translation, that some people were talking about it going behind the veil with that censer, with that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the paint.
But maybe it was
so to
kept
speak.
on the
Right, so-
outside, and then he would take it inside on the
Right.
Day of
On the Day of
Atonement,
Atonement.
and then
Right.
bring it back.
Well, not the
That's
entire
right,
altar,
no.
but part of the incense, right?
Right,
It says
right.
that some of the incense
Right.
he's taking with him
Yeah.
because it creates a
Yeah.
Wow.
a cloud
Right.
around him, and then he comes in. So wait. Okay, see, we're getting ahead of ourselves because there's already so much that's already going on. There's so much detail. What I want to remember though is that this gets blood on it too.
Yes.
Yes, it
Okay,
does.
this gets blood from the bull.
Right.
Okay, the sin offering. So we have blood here at the altar. So let's walk through this process. Okay, we've got a bull. Aaron has already washed himself in the laver. He has already put his garments on as the high priest. He has then taken a bull and put it on the altar. He has cut its throat. He has taken the blood of the bull, put it in a bowl. He has then walked in here and he has sprinkled blood here, right? Then he has taken a censer or a pan of incense. So here we have another receptacle of some sort, right? He's going to take that and he's going to go in here and he will have the incense burning and surrounding him in a cloud. He will then put blood here on the mercy seat. Then he will sprinkle 7 times in front of the mercy seat this blood, and that is the process, right? Okay, now, does he do this 3 times? Or does he do it 1 time? One time, right? Because we know that he does it how many times a year?
One.
Once a year. So, whether you think that the ram is the same as a goat, and you talk about it being the goat and the scapegoat and all that kind of stuff, or you believe that it is a separate sheep, this is all happening one time. So, the same process, by the same process that he's washed himself, he's girded himself with the garments of the high priest, he has then walked up to the altar, he kills a bull, he kills a ram, he kills a goat. He does it here. He takes the blood of the bull, of the ram, of the goat, puts it on the altar. He walks in here, he puts it here, he puts it on the mercy seat, he brings his incense, puts it on the blood on the mercy seat, and sprinkles the blood in front of it, okay?
Is it just the blood of the bull at that point?
Well, no,
or
that's what
the
I'm saying,
others?
because otherwise, if it's not happening concurrently, if it happens sequentially, he has
He's
to go
doing it
in there
3
3 times.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And that's where I got
Oh,
confused,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because I was like, okay, so when is he doing this one, and when is he doing that
Yeah.
one, and when is he doing that one?
Yeah.
I believe from reading it that this would all happen at the same time,
So he's
right?
killing all of
So
them.
now he's
Okay.
killing all of them at the same
And
time.
putting all the blood in the same thing? We don't
I would
know.
think so,
But-
because he's taking it all
Right,
here,
right.
getting some
At
incense.
some point, he sprinkles it on himself, doesn't he? When did that happen?
That was at the what is it called? Not convocation. Like the,
Inauguration?
when he, yeah, the inauguration,
Oh.
right? The inauguration of the covenant,
Oh, okay.
and when a high priest is made high
Okay,
priest, right?
okay.
So there's a separate ceremony
Okay.
for that,
Okay.
right? So this is just the ceremony
Okay.
of the Day of Atonement, right? So here we go. We've got these 3 things happening, these 3 animals being offered on this altar. Now, again, we had to jump around in order for all that to kind of come into place, but I do want to bring up the goats. Okay, are we ready?
Before we do
Okay.
that, based on what you just said about it all happening at the same time, there's a lot of time references here, though.
Like then and
Aaron,
there, yeah.
Then Aaron, then Aaron.
I know, and that's what's hard about it, because as we were reading it, he'd say things that happened before and then say it happened again, and then say it happened again, and you're like, well, but it says it happens once, like overall, right? So that's the part where I am completely willing to be wrong, but based on taking it all apart, putting it all back together, and trying to keep it in context and that kind of thing, I think that it's almost like he explains this little thing, and then he goes over here and he explains this other thing, and oh wait, that's supposed to happen. And I know that sounds really confusing, because with God it shouldn't be confusing, but somehow they got it and it's hard for us. I think that's really what it comes down to. But again, we're going to be able to look at our commentaries next week, and we can set all right.
Well, I think when you go through in verse by verse in order, and you start saying, okay, he cast lots for the 2 goats, he
Yes.
slaughtered the bull, and then when you come to another one, it says, then it just adds more detail.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah.
And then it
Yeah.
kind of comes to a conclusion in the last couple of verses. He made atonement for the holy sanctuary, he atonement
Right.
for the meeting, for the altar, for the priests, and for the people. So that's why I kind of come to the same conclusion.
Right.
Then
That
he
it's,
has to go back and bathe again when
Yes.
it's all said and done.
What-
Yes.
So you came to the same conclusion that it's all happening concurrently?
Yeah.
Okay.
okay, so I agree with that. Now, so let's talk about the goats, because we got to get the goats up there, okay? So, my goat picture.
Oh, I love the scapegoat.
Here's my goat. Can you guess which one's the scapegoat? Yeah. Big guy. The happy guy. Because he gets to live, right? Not that he
But with
doesn't.
all the sins.
Doesn't he have a nice curse like the head of him?
He's banished.
Where he goes out to the wilderness to be ripped apart by
No.
the wild beast.
Okay, so we have these goats, okay? Now, where does this part happen?
It's still at the altar. at
Well,
that
except for
point.
the choosing. Where does that happen?
The doorway of the
Cast
That's here, that's right here at the doorway. So this is where
Oh.
the goats are, okay?
Okay.
So here's where we have the
Oh, wait,
casting.
it says the doorway of the tent of meeting, so wouldn't that be up above the laver?
No, it would be here.
No, it's-
Because
Yeah,
they're
the
not
whole
allowed
thing
in
is
here.
the tent of
The
meeting.
people aren't allowed in here.
Right.
And we also know that, and this is from maybe another place in scripture, that this is done in front of the people, right?
Mhm.
We know that it's done in front of the people
Right.
Oh,
because
right.
it's taking the sins of the people committed in ignorance and being laid upon this scapegoat, right? So we have them meet, goats are brought, they're brought to the door. We have the casting of lots. One is chosen to sacrifice for the Lord. The other, the sins of the people are laid upon it, and what happens to that?
A guy is designated to take that goat out into the wilderness and release it.
And then what happens to the guy?
He has to come back and wash himself.
He has to wash himself where?
Outside the
well,
He
camp.
has to wash himself outside of
Oh, that's
the,
right.
outside of the camp, then he can come back and he can be clean. And similarly, we're gonna talk about what happens to these guys, okay? So here we're down to one goat and one bull, and we think, some of us do, and, you know, we're fine with being different
Yeah.
until we're shown what is
Otherwise.
dogmatically correct. We have a goat, we have a bull, we have a ram. Okay, now, the same process happens, because remember, this is, and at first I thought that it was different, and I really had a hard time, because I thought, okay, the goat is sacrificed at a different time, because it doesn't say that at least this is what I thought, that it doesn't say that the goat's blood is put here. And so I thought, okay, this is different. But then I found that there is a verse that tells us that the goat's blood is put there, and it's Leviticus 16:15. Okay, so there's your chapter and
Oh, yes,
verse.
it is.
To let you know, then he shall slaughter who?
The goat.
The goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, and bring its blood inside the veil and do with its blood as he did with the blood of the bull, and sprinkle it on the mercy seat and in front of the mercy seat. Now, does it all have to be in the same receptacle according to that verse? No, it doesn't. But somehow, this is all happening, right? The 3 animals being sacrificed on the altar, 3 bloody animals with their blood put into something that he can then move it to here, sprinkle it here, get some incense, sprinkle it here and here, and then come out, right? He doesn't go in and do this 3 times. We know that he doesn't go in and do it 3 times because it's once a year, right? That's my reading of it.
Well, one of the things, see, because it never mentions the word ram again through the whole thing, and it never mentions another
Yeah, you're right.
killing or a Gavin.
Right,
So
yeah.
that's why.
It's really
One of
interesting.
the reasons,
Yeah.
I'm gonna investigate.
Yeah, I know. It's now, the reason that I thought
Well, in
that,
15, it does say he slaughters the goat.
okay, but we're almost there. We are almost there.
Sorry.
No, it's totally fine. Okay, so here we go. So what happens next? He has done his work. It's not finished because only Jesus finishes that work, right? But he's going to come next year, but he's done his work for today, right? For the Day of Atonement. He has sprinkled the blood in the places where he is supposed to sprinkle the blood. What happens next?
He bathes and changes
Takes his
clothes
clothes
So he
off.
takes
Yes,
off his
take
linen garments.
The linen
Yeah.
garments
Which
off
are
and
probably
bathe
covered in
again.
blood.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very messy business, right?
Yeah.
And here's another thing, and I have like I feel like I have some of the stupidest questions, but at the same time, it's like, okay, so do you think that they then wash the table? I know, I mean, and again,
Yeah.
see, blood on everything.
Yeah.
Right, and these are the things that I'm wondering, that I'm hoping that when we get to be able to look at our resources,
Commentaries, yeah.
that hopefully we'll be able to get some, I know they're simple, really like, questions, but at the same time, like it's, is it okay to clean these things? Are
Yeah.
these things always going to have blood on them? What does this look like? So anyway, he then comes out here and he washes in the laver again and takes off the high priestly garments, returns to his priestly garments, and then what does he do?
Makes atonement for himself and for the people with a burnt offering. 20, verse 24.
What? Oh! Did we find a place for this?
No, it never mentions the,
But it's a burnt offering,
Oh, that's true, we did know that at the beginning.
right? It's called
Right,
a
the
burnt
ram is
offering.
burnt.
oh, okay. So they just don't name him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting? That's me. That's again.
That's interesting.
I'm finding completely wrong and finding out that next week. But we do have this burnt offering. So his work of the Day of Atonement is not completed after he sprinkles the blood until he goes washes himself and then
And
offers the
offers the
burnt
burnt
offering.
offering.
Now let me ask you this. What happens to this guy?
Oh, he gets taken
Oh,
outside.
they all get.
And what happens
yeah.
to this guy?
Same thing.
But what happens to this guy?
He gets burnt up.
He gets burnt up. So that's why I think there's 3.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
So now let's be real specific and clear on that bull and that goat. What happens to them?
That's
They are
verse
killed here.
27.
Okay, verse 27 tells us what?
They shall be taken outside the camp, and they shall burn their hides, their flesh, and their refuse in the fire.
Right, so it's their hides, their flesh, their refuse. Is that everything?
Everything that's left.
That's everything,
Pretty
right?
much.
So what is taken from them is their blood.
Their blood,
Right, that's
yeah.
it. And the rest, now typically, is that typical of a sacrifice that is done on
Wait,
the altar?
then he shall offer it up and smoke the fat of the offering on the old altar.
Okay, so here we have the blood and the fat here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's just that extra detail, right? So what typically happens on the altar?
Burn the animal.
They burn the whole thing, right? They
Well, they take the
well,
priestly part.
they take the, and there's a portion and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. But this is a unique day, right? So something unique happens. Instead of offering it as a burnt offering, it is offered just blood, and then the fat is burnt on the altar, and the rest of the entire animal, or 2 animals, is taken out of the city and burned outside of the city. Now, what about the person who had to go whose job that was?
Yeah, then he has to get
Same
cleaned up.
thing, he had to wash his clothes and bathe outside the camp and then was allowed back in.
And then he can come back in and he's clean. Now, okay, does that give us a pretty good picture of what is happening on the Day of Atonement? I mean, again,
That helps a lot.
there are questions, believe me, there are questions. But the last thing that we want to know is what they tell us in verse 30. How long does this ceremony, how long does the effect last?
A year.
Just a year.
Hmm?
It doesn't say in verse 30.
1 day.
On this day. that
For
atonement.
on this day, the
Oh.
atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you. You will be clean from all your sins before the Lord.
It's true, it was
It's-
in arrears.
Yeah,
Right,
it's,
it took
it's
care of, right.
one
Just
day.
one day.
One day.
Oh.
Because what's gonna happen when the priest wakes up tomorrow?
There's gonna be sin again.
There's gonna be sin and there's gonna be sacrifice for sin, right?
Right.
This starts all over, but this is a special day, right? It's a holy day. It
For the
happens
past,
for the past.
not to take care of
That
the
doesn't-
coming year.
Right, but this is one day.
One day.
And it
Oh, okay.
lasts for one
That
day.
day.
Does it seem so futile?
Yeah.
Does it make you go, Jesus is a much better
Mhm,
sacrifice? Because we
mhm.
know that he entered the holy place
Mhm.
when? Once
Once for all.
all. Whereas the high priest enters once a year, year after year in a perpetual statute. Jesus is better because he offers once for all. And he also doesn't have to offer for the sins of him and his family. He offers just for the people, right? He offers, and what does he bring? Does he bring the blood of bulls and goats?
No, his own blood.
He brings the blood, his own blood, as of a lamb,
Mhm.
spotless,
Mhm.
right? So it's a beautiful, I mean,
Yeah.
it's this beautiful thing, and I'm so, I can't wait until we can talk about it, because Laura sent me a question this week, and I just started thinking about it, and it was like, it just led me on. We talked about it last week. Somebody asked, then why does the mercy seat in heaven have to be purified? Do you remember that?
We did.
That we asked that
Sin
question last week?
Because heaven is defiled.
Right. But that bothered me.
Yeah.
It bothered me
Bothers
big
me
time.
too.
Oh.
And so I am really, really excited till we get there. I don't know if that's gonna be something that we even get to talk about, but if we get to the end of Hebrews, it's part 2, and we haven't talked about it yet, we'll talk about it, I promise. Okay, yes.
But even though they went through all this, they had no relationship with God.
Right, because
Mhm.
who's doing it?
The priest.
One
The
guy.
high-
Even the priesthood is not doing this, right? He's doing it for the people.
And, but they still don't have I mean, they can't cry out to him. They can't hear his voice. They can't feel his presence, you know?
Not the way that, you know, there were special people.
Yes.
Yeah,
I don't mean
Yes.
like they were anything.
God
you know,
came to.
Yeah, there's
to
special
speak into
circumstances.
But I mean, we all have that,
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
Yes, we have such a
They,
privilege.
even though they've done this, they don't have that.
Right.
But they did, I mean, remember, this is, God set this up. So it
Yes.
was God's way for them to have atonement for that period of time.
Mhm.
So it is different than we have it, and certainly not as good as, but for their time and space, they were following God's
Yeah.
way.
But they don't get to
like
lay
you're
down at night and talk to
Yes,
the Father,
yes,
you
right.
know,
yes.
and,
In the same way that we do.
Yeah.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, and feel
Yes.
His presence
Yeah.
from the
Yes.
Holy Spirit that we have in us. I
I
mean,
know.
Priesthood of
That's
all
such a-
believers. They
Yeah.
didn't
It's-
have that.
Yeah, it's a miraculous thing because it changes. Now, okay, so you're pointing out the flaws in this system, right? So was the author of Hebrews, right? What did he say? Now, this is just our list from Hebrews, remember? What did he say about it?
Can Cannot make it
Cannot.
perfect.
Can't make it perfect, and it can't make your conscience clean, right? So when you lay your head on the pillow at night, you recognize, because this continually pointed out that I'm a sinner, that I am unclean, that I am unholy, that I am unworthy of standing in the presence of a holy God, that even one man only gets to do it once a year. And even at that, there's so many regulations and so many rules about it. So yes, that's why the author of Hebrews is saying, do you see? It's not even worth going back to that. Look what you have in Christ. Look what you have. You can be perfect in Christ. You can have your conscience washed clean, and he has that comparison, and we're going to be exploring that more. But yes, it's just, it's so much better. Oh, Jesus is so much better than this, right? There wasn't anything wrong with this other than the blood of bulls and goats cannot wash away sins, right?
And ours is instant.
Oh, just
Ours is instant.
Yeah.
You know, this is once a year, but then I've read before where, like, if someone took somebody's life and they had that city they could go
The
to.
city of refuge, yes.
And then there was years you waited, or, you know, the year of Jubilee. I mean, everything is a waiting, you know,
Yes.
like, we're so blessed to have it instant forgiveness. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
We have the completion of it. And that's what's so exciting about it. And he's saying it's complete, right? You have it in full. Don't look back.
But I
Don't
think
look
it's so
back.
good to study this
Oh, yeah.
because it has caused me to realize the holiness of God. Of course, we know God is holy, but I think, especially here in America, where, you know, you can believe or not, or talk, you know, whatever. But it's been so good for me to realize He is so holy that we tend to.
Bring him down to our level.
Thank you. She knew I was grasping for my words, that we make him too cheap. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? And
Yeah.
and he is so. I mean, if he is so holy that you had to do everything exactly like that, I mean, I can't. It gives me goosebumps to think of how holy he is and how we lighten him, how we trivialize him, and it makes me sad.
Right, and so in a sense, those Old Testament people, those Old Testament Jewish people, had a better picture
Absolutely,
of who God was,
absolutely.
because year after year this
Yeah.
was done,
Yeah.
and we've gotten away from it
Yeah.
because here we
It's so
are. We
easy.
studied it for a week, and we're still going, I don't quite get it, you know. But they knew it from the beginning, so it's kind of a double-edged sword because they have it from the beginning. It can be, it's time for the Day of Atonement again, you know, and then that kind of thing. But the holiness of God
Yes.
required them to have a holy fear
Yes.
of Him that we are
We don't
sorely
have
lacking.
that
We are
anymore.
sorely
That's
lacking.
true.
But that's why it's been so exciting for me. And again, I'm not going to share with what I've been thinking about. But it's so exciting to me because we get these glimpses of who He is because He has revealed Himself in His Word. And when we study His Word, we can know Him better and we can put Him back into
Yes,
the proper
into-
place.
yes, right.
Right? And so we have the opportunity to worship Him as He is,
As He is.
as a holy God.
And it gives us a better picture of the story of when they are moving the ark and it starts, they're not doing it the proper way. I mean, their hearts were right, but they just didn't research how to do it properly. It starts to tip and this guy tries to save it and he dies because it's holy and he's not. And, you know, you first read that, I did years ago, and think, what kind of God would do that? That's mean, you know, but it's not mean. He's holy.
It's consistent with his
He-
character.
Well, and it's not like he zapped him. It's like his holiness. It's up to
He couldn't
us to
stand
recognize
in
his holiness.
And he gave them instructions.
And he gave him instructions. That's right.
He doesn't, it's not a guessing God.
No,
He's not
no,
out to see
yeah.
us fail.
No.
He gives us everything
Yeah.
we need.
And they
to
just hadn't
walk in
researched that, I
righteousness.
think, at that point.
And
I don't
I
think
think
they
they
knew at
have
that
lost,
point.
they have
Yeah.
lost all of that.
Yeah.
And of course, the ark had moved all over.
Right.
Well, and what's interesting about that, and that you bring that up, because we had the contrast with what the Philistines thought
Yeah.
of this ark, right? They think it's kind of like a rabbit's foot, or
Yeah.
a lucky charm, or that
That is the
that
God.
the God, yeah, that God is in that box,
Right.
right? And so, but what the Philistines do, when we didn't read the next chapter, but when they get it, they got some problems,
Yeah.
right? They got some problems
They got
in their
rid of it.
camp, right? But they come up with this just random stuff to appease this God, you know, and like these little gold, like
Golden tubers.
but it's a guessing game.
Yeah.
It's a guessing
Yes.
game for anybody else.
Right.
But here we have a God who lays it out in such clear and precise detail of, this is how you treat me. This is how you have relationship with me. I am holy. You will be holy when you are in my presence.
And we can, and the vast numbers of Christianity aren't studying it to know that.
No.
Right.
And in most churches, you're getting spoon-fed a little bit of sugar with no meat. And so it's going to be frightening those who will say, excuse me, I don't really recognize you.
Right. You don't have the blood of the Lamb on you, right? Because that's what covers us. That's what enables us to stand in His presence. And I mean, again, to go from this into what we have in Christ, that we pass, we are with Him as He passes through the heavens, and He is
So much
in the holy place. Oh, it's so much better. It's so much better. We agree with the author of Hebrews, and we go, why would you ever want
Yeah.
that? Why would you?
Yeah.
But apparently, this pulled them. This was easier, right?
Yeah.
This was easier to understand, and then we talked about that too, is
And
you
that
don't
I
have,
can get.
Yeah, I can
That
too.
I can get.
Yeah.
If you give me a map and say,
Yeah.
you know, go from Indio to La Quinta to Palm Desert to Palm Springs, I can kind of get that. But if you just tell me to fly over,
Yes.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's out of our comprehension,
Yeah.
this thing Jesus did for us.
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's beyond the heavens. It's beyond our
I kind
understanding.
of struggle a little bit, but then I kind of understand, because as a new believer, you are on fire to feel the presence of the Lord within you, to feel cleansed, to feel all that. These must have been believers that are not new believers, because they've had to have been believers for some time to have drifted away from that, to be to have stepped out of that awe and reverence of what has happened in their life.
Yeah.
And it tells us that
Because-
they have grown dull of hearing.
Because
Right.
the fear of not doing this, I mean, it's got to be rich in their blood. If this is what you've done, and the fear of the Lord not doing, I mean, if the priest himself, the priest has to wear a robe on him, who are we, or what would we have to wear if we even got close to the building? You know what I mean?
Because it would be considered blasphemy.
And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
the fear of not complying with God.
Yes. Yes.
They must have drifted away from, I mean, they must have been saved for some time and not being fed, because,
Well, and
you know,
it-
in our lives, when we're first saved, we're very on fire because we have been cleansed and we seen and feel the Holy Spirit in our lives. And that is just, I mean,
But if you go back to the context of Hebrews, when it was taking place, they were undergoing severe persecution,
Yeah.
being put into prison for their faith,
Yes.
losing their businesses, being
so
Cast
out of
away
fear
from
of
their
what was going on
families.
around
So-
them.
Yeah.
more
Yeah,
saved.
and also,
Yeah.
and add that concept, and then you have these teachers coming around
Right.
saying,
Yes.
you've got to do Jesus and the law.
Uh-huh.
You know, the Judaizers, where it's
Oh.
just add a little law into your
Right.
Jesus,
Just to make
and
sure.
you have it all, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, you still got to keep all this up,
Yeah.
and you got Jesus.
Yeah.
So that's they're coming. It's coming up. It's
Yeah.
real.
Because that-
The struggle that
Gotta
they
be hard
have.
to
Yeah.
Sure.
walk away from.
Yes.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. And it's harder to walk away from it when somebody who you respect as a teacher is saying, yes, you do need to do all of this, right?
Well,
This
and
needs to keep
it's
up.
also their culture too, and I think we need to keep that in mind. You know, to us, it's
Yes.
our religion. Anyway, catch me here. But with them, it was their culture. It was how they were brought up.
The
It was
entire
their,
congregation's coming to this.
and so it's almost like they're having to walk away from, see, my greats lived in the United States, so I can't really get a good grasp on culture from another country too
Right,
well, because
right.
I'm just American, I have always been. But I can understand someone coming here from another country, that's their culture. And so it would be hard to completely just,
Those that can identify with that.
yeah, turn away from that.
Right.
And you would feel, I just think it would be.
You feel adrift.
You'd feel adrift, but you'd also feel, what's the word I'm looking for, where you're not being faithful to them. You're not being.
Oh, like you're forsaking them.
Yeah,
Or
you know
like
what-
saying that it's not
Yeah,
good enough for.
yeah, you know, you're forsaking them. You're forsaking your roots.
Right.
Oh, it takes a community to get my thoughts out anymore.
Takes a village, Jane, it takes a village.
Yeah, I mean, they really do. I mean, I think we are, because we are studying this the way that we are, that we're realizing that, yes, they have all of these pressures upon them, right?
Yeah.
So it gives us that sympathy. And you know what? That's a well-placed sympathy, because the author of Hebrews sees it too. And he cares for them so much that he writes this letter.
Yes.
And he doesn't wag his finger at
No.
them. You shouldn't
No.
be doing that. He comes alongside and says, let's press on to Jesus. Let me show you how he's better, so that you'll never want to go back to that. That you'll
Yeah.
move forward in your faith, right? Because it is, we're going to be growing, and they had become stagnant. And it's not, oh, you've become stagnant, there's nothing, you're worthless now,
Yeah.
right? It's no, keep pressing on towards Jesus. Eyes on him, focus, lean in, listen, stand firm, hold fast to what you have until the end, right? So these are the exhortations that he has, because he recognizes how hard it is to be a believer in a world that doesn't even recognize it. It's a whole paradigm shift too.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
as we've talked about too, within all of what we understand in the Old Testament are mysteries
Yeah.
that are not revealed until Christ comes.
Right.
And so it says that there's a veil over the eyes of those who hold on to this because they can't see. That veil has to be removed so that they can see that in Christ every bit of this is fulfilled, and it's a once for all thing, right? So, we have to have that sympathy too.
Well,
for them.
and because we do know that our author of Hebrews was a secondhand hearer, the people were also second or third-hand
Yes,
hearers.
right.
Yes.
You know, you have to remember that.
Right.
So it's not like they saw Jesus, they saw, they saw the crucifixion, they saw
Yeah.
the ascension, but they didn't, it's like, okay, let me just say this too. And if I'm the only one here, then so be it. In our Christian walk, from the day we did accept Christ, how many of us in this room have said, maybe we have it all wrong?
Exactly, I was just thinking of that
Maybe,
too.
maybe they're right, and maybe we have it all wrong. You know, I can totally sympathize with that, wanting to go back to what is comfortable or
Comfortable,
secure, that sort. I can totally understand when you have the whole world coming agast us.
Yeah.
And we may face that.
I think it's starting
at
to
one
happen.
time,
Yeah.
where it's all
Yeah.
coming against us, and thing just looks like it's getting worse instead of better. There will be many that drift away, that are drifting away.
Right. Okay, so.
Just for
Okay,
clarity, so, Hebrews then, from when the veil was torn and Christ died and rose, how far is that roughly?
I couldn't give you a
Doesn't
year.
say.
I'm sorry that I can't.
No, I'm-
But it's long enough for the author of Hebrews to be in a position of maybe leadership in the church, and I don't mean a church, I mean the church universal. And he was a secondhand hearer. Okay, so if he's a secondhand hearer, he is removed to a certain extent. He is not a witness.
But it's
He's
not
an
that
apostle.
far removed, because
Right,
it
not that
says
far
he
removed.
knew Timothy. And
Right.
That's
Timothy,
true.
we
Right.
know, traveled
Right.
with Paul.
Right.
So it could be, what,
So-
30 years or something?
Okay,
Also,
but
they have
Paul
been mature enough in
didn't
their
see-
faith
I
that
mean,
they
Paul
should
was
be
not a
teachers by that
contemporary
point.
of
He's not a first hand believer either.
So we're
No,
removed,
that's true.
we're
Well,
removed
that's
it now.
better,
Yeah.
It's not like 6 days later, okay? This is not, this.
We're probably talking a generation, 30 years.
Maybe up to a
30,
generation, yeah,
yeah.
maybe up to a
30
generation.
years.
But we also know, or at least I feel, maybe we don't know, but what I get from reading and studying is that this is while the temple is still in place. And the reason why is because he's talking about this as though this is actually happening still, right? So
Yeah.
this whole practice is still going
So
on.
it's
That's what my brain was
Before-
thinking too.
Right.
What did they do after they saw the veil torn? Is this
Yeah.
what did they try to sew it up?
I
What did they
guess
do?
it was time to replace it. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know because they had to replace it, right? So it's replaced, and it is. Let's move on in our faith.
But
and this event has happened.
It was
that
only
has
67 years.
I was gonna say, I thought that was the end. I thought
No,
that
no, no,
that
no,
was
no.
the end of
No,
their.
the temple is not destroyed yet.
No, I know that, but I thought that was I had always been taught that was the end of sacrifices, that all stopped at that point.
I
no.
don't believe so. I think
No,
it's
I
when
don't
the
think
temple
so.
is destroyed. We will find out hopefully in
They
next,
don't-
when we finally get to open up a book and discuss this Jewish custom, because that to me is the part that I'm like, okay, I really need to know some of these things, and I feel like kind of not so good coming and standing before you, but we're just talking about what does the Word of God say at this point, right? So when we finally get to have some of those extra biblical things, that'll help shed light on it.
Yeah.
But we will also be able to, and this is the last little thing that I wanted to, so we're tying it together very nicely. We will also be able to say what we know to be true from the Word, right? So that if something comes along and says, this is the case with this, oh, well, this says this, but it means this, we can go, it says that and means that, right? Because we
Yeah.
know that God means what He says. And so that's what I was saying when I was doing just the tiniest bit of research online. I found so many things that said, well, this is all spiritualized. This is all in a spiritual realm. This is not physical. And I want to ask you this, as we do our study this next week, we're going to continue to look at the sacrifice, and we're going to look at the Day of Atonement as it relates to Jesus in His high priestly role. So that's the next. So we're going to still be on this topic. We're kind of moving along, and the main topic is this sacrifice of Himself as the great high priest. That's going to be what we're talking about. But as we do our study, I want you to kind of keep asking questions. Keep asking those observation questions of the text: the who, what, when, where, why, and how, because that will put us in good stead. And I also want you to ask yourself, is this literal or is this symbolic? Do I believe this to be literal or do I believe this to be symbolic? And it will change the way that you view this book and these chapters. Because if you come to it with a preconceived notion of one or the other, it's going to change the way you look at it.
Right.
So that's why I want you to just the facts, ma'am, right? Just the who, what, when, where, why, how. This week, just try to stay with it as much as possible. When we finally get to the interpretation and the commentaries and the application, that kind of thing, then we'll be able to go, no. I know that's not true because it says this here, right? Or, hey, I agree with this guy, and I really like what he has to say, and I like how he adds to it, and that kind of thing. That's how we determine whether a commentary is worth our time or not, right?
Just for clarity, so for people to be totally clean and people to be clean from their sins and pure in front of God, they have to go through this every day.
No,
Like
every
the
year, but as the author of Hebrews
once
lets
a
us
year.
know, that doesn't take care of this.
Right.
That never took care of this.
Yeah.
Right? It took care of the flesh and blood,
Yes,
right?
it had to be
the
done
covering
once a year,
for it.
but-
Yeah, it's just a once a year.
Right.
Right. And yes, they had to go through it. In order to be able to stand before a holy God on one day, one
Right,
man
yes.
had to do this. That's it. Now, does that
But
seem
there
like
were other sacrifices.
Yes, this is
they
going-
went along the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
This was the Christmas of sacrifices,
Yeah.
I guess.
This is a very important, and I think we're also going to be looking at what made it different, okay? Because we're also going to be looking at what made Jesus' sacrifice different.
And you know, Osa, everything that is done here from the beginning is to point us to Christ. And so the life is in the blood. If you drain the life out of something, if you drain the blood out of something, it's dead. So that's why it was always the blood that had to cover. It's so amazing to me because it's all done by God to point to Christ.
Yes.
But then when it's done in Christ, it points back to God's law. It's amazing.
Because he fulfills it, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm getting so excited, because there is so much good stuff. Okay, so
But they were never clean from sin.
No.
They were
Right.
never.
So they were never, because I was referring to verse 30 there, where it says, on this day that atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you, will be clean from all your sins before the Lord. At that day, they were totally clean.
Of
and
their
they could be
sins.
free, like we are every day.
And it was
compared.
it was a celebration. I mean, to a certain extent,
We're
I think
serving
there's a
every day.
mourning
us.
probably in the
Yeah,
early days.
but not for them.
Not
So,
for that.
right.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's why Jesus is better.